job singing and worshiping this morning. Appreciate you all participating there. If you got your Bible, turn to Exodus 17. That's where we have left off in our study through this second book in the Bible, the story of Moses, the story of the Ten Commandments, the story of God delivering His people out of Egypt. And we left off last week with God giving His people two tests. They've already escaped Egypt. They've already escaped bondage and slavery, and now they're out in the wilderness, and God put some tests before them. One of them is the test of thirst. They didn't have any water. They'd run out. They had been 3 days into their journey, and what are they going to drink? They come upon a place, and all they have is bitter water. It's undrinkable. What are they going to do? God provides. They get about a month down the road, and they're hungry. They've run out of all supply of the food that they had brought with them. They bought everything along the road that they could get, and God once again provides. He provides miraculously manna, bread from heaven that just pours down from heaven every morning, and they just collect it and are able to make it, and God provides for them. Provides, not just provides, but He provides just enough for them. God said, don't take any more than what I'm prescribing, what you need, because it's not going to last, and it went bad overnight if they did. God provided everything that they needed in a very miraculous way. They learned the lesson, right? Well, here we are in chapter 17, and we see a little more of the same, right? There's going to be an issue with water again. Are they going to be reminded that God has already taken care of them, or are they going to look at the circumstances right in front of them and complain and grumble to God? I think you probably know the answer to that. Chapter 17, verse 1, the whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Here's an important question. Why do you put the Lord to the test? So God's leading them, right? We've already seen that God has provided His presence in a cloud during the day, a pillar of fire at night, God leading them every step of the way. They don't have to wonder whether they misstepped, whether they went the wrong direction. God is very clearly leading them. And now God has led them to a place where there is no water. That's important for us to understand. That's important for them to understand. This was not accident. This was not random. God had led them there. And it's probably important for us to understand, too, that that they were indeed thirsty. That was a real thirst. It wasn't wrong that they were thirsty. It was a real need. But that's not the issue. The issue is that they put God to the test. They could have said, God, we're thirsty. Would you provide water? Would you provide something for us to drink? But it says that they grumbled and they put God to the test. And so let's read on with the story. Verse 3, the people were thirsty for water there. They grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst? Can't believe that you did this. Why, God? So then Moses cried out to the Lord, what am I to do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me. So Moses likely had a very valid concern. I think these people are going to do away with me. I think they're going to get rid of me. They're going to stone me and take care of this. So the people grumble. They complain to God. They complain to Moses. Moses says, what am I going to do with these people? Moses goes to God and asks him that. And so then the Lord answers Moses, go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And so God says, this is what I want you to do, Moses. I want you to go, take the lead, take some people with you, take some leaders with you, and I want you to take that staff that you have had all along, since all the way back to your shepherding days, the same staff that God said before Pharaoh, I want you to lay it down, it turned into a serpent, I want you to pick it up. He picked it up, it turned back into his staff. The same staff that he struck the Nile River with, and it turned into blood. The same staff that he, before the Red Sea, raised it up, and the waters parted, and the Israelites were able to cross over on dry land. God says, I want you to take that staff, and I want you to strike this rock, and through that, God provided water. God's saying, I will be with you. I will stand with you. God is with you through this. The people are complaining. They're complaining to God, but once again, God blesses in a miraculous way and shows that He's better than they deserved and better than we deserve, right? We do the same thing. We complain, we grumble. God, why aren't you with us? God, why aren't you taking care of us? God provides for us. God is better than we deserve. Verse 7 wraps up this section of the chapter, and he called the place Massa, that means testing, and Meribah, which means quarreling, aptly described, right? Because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? I mean, that was their question, right? Did you bring us out here just to let us be by ourselves and die, or are you with us? Is the Lord among us or not? I suspect some of you have the same question. Maybe right now, or maybe it was last week or last month or last year, or maybe you'll have it next month or next year. Is the Lord among us or not? The Israelites, they had every reason to believe. Every reason, right? God's already miraculously delivered them out of their slavery that they had been in for hundreds of years. God had provided in miraculous ways, like crossing the Red Sea. God had miraculously provided water. He'd provided food. God had miraculously guided them, pillar of fire by night, cloud by day. God was with them every step of the way, and now they're like, is the Lord among us or not? Isn't that an interesting question for us to look back and ask, right? I mean, that's an easy thing for us to say now, looking back on it, like, how could you guys miss that? How could you miss whether God is with you or not? But we miss it, don't we? Because the truth is, most of us at some point could say, I can see where the Lord has been with me, and I could see how the Lord had guided me, and I could see how the Lord miraculously provided, but it doesn't feel like it right now. And my question is the Lord with me or not? And of course the Lord is with you. And what we do in those times where we're uncertain whether the Lord is with us or not is we remember the times that He was evidently with us, that we can look back and we go, we can see the evidence that He was there. He saved us. He was with us. He provided for us. He blessed us. He blessed your family. If you're in a place right now where you're wondering, or you're going to be in the future, a place where you're wondering, is God with me? Is God care? Then I want you to think about some time where you know God was with you and you know that God cared for you. God shows up in a big way right here. Apparently no water around for them. This wasn't a pool of water that, like last week, you remember Moses throws a piece of wood in and it turns the bitter water. There's nothing to work with right here. There's just rocks. And what does God tell Moses to do? Take your staff and strike the rock. And water just pours out of this thing. The most unlikely, most incredulous thing that could provide water, right? A rock. Water comes out of rock. But what we find out is that there is more to this miracle. The Apostle Paul, later on in 1 Corinthians, is going to kind of describe the journey of the Israelites because he's a Jew himself. He had heard, he had known all of these stories. And so he, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, tells the story about their ancestors, and he talks about how they really didn't trust God, and sometimes people then could be just like them. And in fact, the idea was don't be like our ancestors who grumbled and complained and always questioned whether God was there. But in the midst of that, look what he says in verse 3 and 4. Again, this is 1 Corinthians chapter 10. He's talking about their Jewish ancestors. They all ate the same spiritual food. What was that? Manna, right? And they drank the same spiritual drink. It was this water that God provided for them. For they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them. Listen to this. He says, oh yeah, and that rock was Christ. So the Apostle Paul, looking back now on the other side of Jesus, says, God provided in miraculous ways, and you know that time that God provided spiritual drink, water from that rock? Just so you know, that was Jesus. Jesus was present. He was there. He was provided in a miraculous way. It was the same Jesus who himself was struck, right? struck while he was paying the price for our sins. It was the same Jesus who said to the Samaritan woman, I've got water of which you will never thirst again. It's the same Jesus who stood up on that festival day as the priest is carrying that pitcher of water in this, ceremonial way. And Jesus says, listen, I am the living water. That's the same Jesus. He was the rock who was present there. It's an amazing story. Jesus, the picture of Jesus showing up all the way back from the desert in Exodus chapter 17. We're going to come back to that. But the story goes on, and we're going to spend a little more time in the second half of the chapter. The Amalekites, we'll talk about them. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. So let's just pause there for just a minute because we need a little direction, a little context of who these people are. The Amalekites have a history, and you need to know about it. They were the descendants of Jacob's brother Esau. Remember, Abraham had a son. His name was Isaac. Isaac had twin boys whose names were Jacob and Esau. Esau was actually the one who was born first, but it was Jacob who later on would steal the birthright, right? And so there had been this animosity between them. Esau wanted to kill his brother Jacob. It seems that they made up a little bit in Genesis, but what we find out is there is a feud that has been going on ever since. And the Amalekites now, the descendants of Esau, are these nomadic people who just kind of wandered around, and they would plunder and attack people and take their wealth, right? In fact, historians tell us that it was the Amalekites who domesticated the camel. I don't know if that's true. The Bible doesn't tell us that, but they domesticated the camel and allowed them to come in and kind of do these swift attacks on people, grab what they wanted, and surprise them and get away. And so what we're told here is there is an unprovoked attack on the Israelites, right? In fact, Deuteronomy, that gives us a little bit of parallel of this story, tells us that they attacked the rear of the caravan, the people who were in the back, right? That would have been the elderly people. It might have been the young people. It was the stragglers. It was the weak people, that type. So the Amalekites come in and they're picking off the people that are the most vulnerable. That's what's happening right here. And so the Israelites are about to go to battle because of this. They've been attacked. They've been slaves, but now here they are, minding their own business, doing what God tells them to do, and they've been attacked. We're going to look at some principles from this because some of you can identify with that. You're just going along with life, and all of a sudden, you've got a battle in front of you. You're just walking along. You're just doing your thing. You're just going through life, and all of a sudden, you find yourself faced with an attacker. And they came up from behind, and they attacked your weak spot. Here you are. What do you do about that? There's some things to remember. We're going to talk about them. Let's go to verse 9. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. Okay? So, interesting thing here. First time the name Joshua appears in our Bible. Now, he's a pretty famous guy, but this is the first time we read about him. Obviously not the first time that he's been around. He obviously has some kind of authority and leadership within the Israelite ranks there. He will become battle-tested. He will be one that will take over and lead Israel after Moses dies. In fact, he'll have his own book. He has his own book in the Old Testament. It's self-named Joshua, that describes what happens after Moses dies and after the people go into the promised land. Joshua explains all that. And so right here, Moses tells Joshua, I want you to choose an army. Okay, that's important. Choose an army. Choose some men. I want you to go into battle. So Joshua's mentioned. There's a guy here named Aaron that's mentioned. We have seen his name before in Exodus. We know that is the brother of Moses. And so he's present. He's the one that's been kind of co-leading. And so Aaron's here. Then there's a third guy that we haven't talked about before. We haven't seen his name. His name is Hur. We don't know anything about Hur except that Jewish historian Josephus tells us that this is Miriam, Moses' sister, that this is her husband. So Moses' brother-in-law. So his brother and brother-in-law, Joshua, a trusted friend. So Moses has some really significant people around him for this really big conflict that's about to happen. Which brings us up to this point. We need to value biblical community. Taking notes, this is a great one to write down. How do you deal when you feel attacked? How do you feel when you're in a battle, when stuff comes up against you? You need to remember biblical community. It's a significant thing. You've heard the phrase, choose your battles wisely. The truth is, you can't always pick your battles, but you can choose your army. Sometimes battles just happen. Sometimes people pick a fight with you. And so you can't always decide the battle, but you can decide the army, the people who are going to stand with you, the people that are going to come with you. It's not just about having some people. It's about having the right people. You need the right people alongside of you for the battles that are going to come up. Maybe you're not in any battles right now, but there will be some battles. You need biblical community. You need some people around you. You need some friends like that will be there for you when those battles come. All kinds of reasons why we don't do that, right? Reasons like, well, I've got friends. I've got good people. I've got family in town. I've got people. I understand that, but does it meet the idea of biblical community? Some people that are going to help me along the right ways. Or maybe your excuse is we're just too busy. I've got too many things. I've already got too many relationships, too many other things. Well, I understand that. But yeah, there's going to be some battles that come. Do you have the right people? I understand maybe you've had a bad experience before. We were in this group one time, or we had these people that, I understand all that. But there will come a time when there will be a battle that you have not chosen, and you can choose the people who will walk alongside of you. Maybe you've just never been exposed to it, and you love coming to Ridge Christian, and you love the services, and you love the songs, and you maybe like, the teaching, and you're like, but you've never taken the step of saying, I need to be in community. It's why we talk about it all the time with our Ridge groups. It's that you cannot pick the battles. You can choose the army that's going to walk through them with you. There will come a time when you will fight a battle that you didn't pick, and you're going to wish you had an army. You're going to wish you had some people. And it'll be the wrong time to start trying to grab some people. The right time is before the battle even begins. Value biblical community. Okay? Go to verse 11. Long as Moses held up his hands, Moses, remember, he's up on the hill. As long as he held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. Whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. That's a problem. When Moses' hand grew tired, they took a stone, they put it under him, and he sat on it. And then Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. This wasn't just like a half hour. It wasn't just a few hours. This was all day till sunset. And then Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. Now, I want you to remember, until now, God's done all the fighting for them. They didn't do a thing when the Egyptian army is pursuing them. They just walked through the Red Sea, and God wipes out the Egyptian army, and they watched. They observed that. But now God's inviting them in to participate. Joshua, choose some men and go out and battle with them. Even Moses, earlier in the chapter, Moses is what I want you to do. I'm not going to just provide the water. I want you to strike the rock. Strike the rock. There's a participation in. The Israelites are going to be a part of it. The Israelites are going to fight the enemy, but make sure you understand it is God who gives the victory. They're going to participate. They're going to cooperate. But it's God who provides the victory. And so because of that, when we go through battles, we want to focus on the one who can deliver. We don't want to focus on the battle itself. We don't want to focus on the enemy. We want to focus on the God who can deliver. That's why Moses is up on the hill, so he can be seen. So the Israelites could see him above, and they could be watched. In a chaotic world, God is to be our focal point, our point of reference. He gives us a true perspective that we can't get otherwise. What's interesting to me is what Moses does. He holds up his hands, right? Holds them up apparently for a long time until he can't do it anymore, and he goes tired and they fall, and then all of a sudden the Amalekites are winning, and he raises them up as long as he can, and his energy falters again. Finally, people are helping him hold up. He sits down, people on either side of him holding up his hand. You know what holding your hands up for the Hebrew was? It was a posture of prayer. Apparently, Moses, whether he's praying out loud or not, is at least in a posture of submission and asking God to intervene on behalf of him and his people. It's a posture of prayer. Now, you and I have a posture of prayer. You've done it already. You closed your eyes, you bow your head. Some of you peeked, I noticed, but most of you bowed your head, you closed your eyes. Sometimes we'll fold our hands up in certain situations. If I'm praying with my grandkids, we'll fold our hands and we'll pray like that, right? We have a posture of prayer that we all understand. For the Hebrew, it was to raise hands. And so there is a picture here of Moses intervening, Moses interceding on behalf of the people to God. But there's also another picture here of hands up. If you put your hands up, you're like surrendering, right? I mean, that's what we see in any kind of cop movie. Put your hands up, right? I'm not gonna do anything. I surrender. I give up. And so there's an essence of that, a posture of surrender. We're going to give it to God. We're going to submit to God. Hands up, and the Israelites are winning. Hands down, and the Amalekites are winning. So let's stay in a posture of submission and prayer to God. See, what happens to me often is I'll get overwhelmed with life. Stuff is happening in life, and maybe dealing with relational issues. Things are coming up, and you just get overwhelmed. I'm assuming you're like this, and I'm like, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to get over this? How am I going to get to the other side of this? Well, when I'm focusing on God, my prayer time in the morning, when I'm doing that, or when I come to worship service on a Sunday morning like this, and I'm singing songs like we've already done about how big God is and what God has done. When I do that, what it does is it puts things into perspective for me. And I realize that God is bigger than my problems, and that God is more powerful than my circumstances. When I look at it from a different perspective, I recognize that God has it under control. My circumstances don't change. I walk away from service, and I may have to walk back into the same ordeal, same mess. Walk in on Monday morning, and deal with the same thing at your work. My circumstances don't change, but my perspective has changed. In fact, some of you may be wondering, why in the world do we do this? Why do we carve out time to do something like this on a Sunday morning? And maybe it's just been a habit that you've just gotten into, and you've just done it. And occasionally you're like, why do I do this? If there is no other reason, it is for this. It gives you a proper perspective. God becomes our point of reference, and so we look to him just like the Israelites looked to Moses. So we value biblical community. We focus on the one who can deliver. And then look at these last couple of verses. Start in verse 14. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears this." Joshua, I want to make sure that you know this in the future, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. That's the leader of the Amalekites. We're going to talk about that because that just seems really off for God to say, I'm going to blot some people out. In fact, some of you struggle with that. I can't believe God would blot out some people. So Moses built an altar, and he called it, "The Lord is my banner." And he said, because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord, or this could say, because hands were lifted up to the throne of the Lord. The Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. So, interesting, all of this. First of all, let's talk about Moses writing all this down. God says, I want you to write this down. So Moses maybe just wrote this down and gave it to Joshua and said, hey, this is for you to remember this. We also know that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And so maybe that's what God is saying, and then Moses just puts them all together in these five books. Some of it things that he observed, just like this event in chapter 17. Some of them God gave to him kind of divine inspiration. Moses wasn't there, but God revealed to him information that he's able to write, like what happened in the beginning. And so God writes this down. But as a part of that, God is obviously not happy with the Amalekites. To say, I will completely blot them out, God's mad. God is angry. And some of us struggle with that, and we're like, that does not sound like the loving God that we know. How could God want to blot out some people? And if we just read that and take that verse all by itself, then it seems off for us. But let's remember that what the Amalekites did was completely unprovoked. They attacked innocent, vulnerable people. They attacked the most vulnerable. It was wicked. It was evil. Besides the fact that they knew this was the people of God, they were fighting against God. And so when we take all of that into perspective, it's understandable that God says, listen, I've got to judge that. I can't allow that. In fact, what's interesting is that later, King Saul, the first king of Israel, God would tell him, this is what I want you to do. The Amalekites, I promised I was going to remove them, and I want you to take care of that. King Saul doesn't do it. He goes and he plunders them, takes all their possession, but he doesn't wipe them out. And God's mad at King Saul, and for good reason, because it made God out to be a liar. God says, I'm going to blot him out. King Saul doesn't, even though God told him to do it. Made God look impotent. It misrepresented God. It gave people the wrong idea of who God really is. That's what happens when we disobey God. We give people a distorted view of God. We give a distorted look of God to the world when we disobey Him and show Him something different. So, there's this incredible victory that takes place. Moses doesn't get the credit. Joshua gets a little bit of the credit, but not all the credit. In fact, Moses is going to say, the Lord is my banner. The actual term is Yahweh Nisi, Jehovah Nisi. That just simply means the Lord, Jehovah. The Lord is my banner. Now, for us, we don't really think of the idea of banner. There's not like a modern day thing for us. Probably the best example would be a flag. The Lord is my flag might be the best way to do that. In fact, we just celebrated Flag Day on Friday, right? The 14th Flag Day. It's a reminder of the introduction of the American flag and the significance that it's had on our country. And so, with that in mind, what I think we need to do when battles come our way, difficulties, when we get attacked, is to hold the banner, hold the flag high. So in a battle, opposing nations would fly their own flags on a pole at each of the respective front lines, and it gave the soldiers this focal point. So in a battle, the flag was their point of reference. In hand-to-hand combat, they couldn't see around them. It was right in front of them. But if something was hoisted up high, a flag or a banner, they could tell we're advancing, or oh no, we're retreating. And so Moses here is this picture of him up on the hill. We can see what's going on. We're winning. Oh no, things aren't going so good. We can tell because the banner is lifted high. Or a flag or a banner in battle, it often is what leads the charge. You see a flag moving ahead, it emboldens, it encourages, it motivates the ranks. One of my favorite movies, The Patriot with Mel Gibson in it, Revolutionary War stuff there. Very into the movie when he is watching everybody in retreat and he grabs the flag and he goes on top of the hill and begins to wave it, and it emboldens the rest of the troops. We're not going to retreat. We're going to charge ahead. It's a reminder of the victory that's been given. But it's also kind of this symbol of hope, isn't it? It's a symbol of hope. It gives hope to us. We sing a song at ball games, big events. We call it the national anthem. It's the Star-Spangled Banner, written by Francis Scott Key. He was watching from the water at Baltimore, at Fort McHenry, when it was attacked during those Revolutionary War days. And he watches it and he pins the words to the song that we still sing. And throughout the night, he just got these glimpses through the glare of rockets exploding. But when the fighting ceased, the question is, which flag is going to be waving in the morning? And so there's this anticipation as a part of the song. If I can just get a glimpse of the flag, if I can just see what's been, to know what's happened. And as dawn cracks, it is this glimpse of the stars and stripes that are still on the flagpole, a symbol of perseverance, a symbol of endurance. And so that it became, for Francis Scott Key, this banner, this American flag became a source of hope for him. And because of his writing, now that song continues, it becomes a source of hope for us. For some of you, it's intensely emotional when you hear that. For some of you, maybe that are veterans, it's intensely emotional. You get goosebumps when that song is played or sung, because it represents something for us. So for these Hebrews who weren't warriors, they had been slaves all their life, and their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, they weren't warriors. They'd been brick makers, been bricklayers. They weren't equipped for this kind of thing. And yet the reminder that the Lord is my banner. The Lord is our victory. When it looked bad, when it looked like the Amalekites were winning, they would just look up and they would see Moses and his lifted hands, and they were reminded, God is with us. God is with us. He's our defender, and I just need to trust Him. And so I don't know what's going on, what battles you're in right now. Maybe you're at a place where your marriage is struggling and you're wondering if you're going to be able to stick it out. Maybe you're a Ridge Group leader or a ministry leader in some place in our church, and you're tired and people don't show up, and you're like, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. Maybe I'm just going to throw in the towel. Maybe you've been a faithful follower of Jesus for a long, long time, but now you're thinking, well, it'd be just easier to coast the rest of my life. This is too hard. This is too difficult. Maybe you're at the point where you're just overwhelmed with some trials, and you're going, I don't know that I can keep it up. I don't even know if I can do this life. You just feel beat up. The message today is the Lord is your banner. He's your victory. He's your hope. And so hold Him high. And honestly, there's going to be some days where you feel like you're winning, just like the Israelites. Sometimes it feels like you're winning. Sometimes it feels like you're losing. And in those times, we trust God. And we look to Him because we know that ultimately Jesus wins. He's going to win. He's our King. And so we go through battles and we go, I don't know how this is going to play out. I don't know what's going to look like. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of the day, but I do know that ultimately God is going to win the victory. Listen, if you're a believer in Jesus, you already know the outcome. You may not know exactly what's going to happen throughout the particular battle or that specific battle, but you already know the outcome. Before you know the outcome, you already know. So what do? We value the community. We may need to choose an army, pick some people to walk through it with us, make sure we've got that. We need to focus on the God who delivers, We keep our eyes up, not on the circumstances. And we hold the banner high. We wave it. We embolden others. We encourage ourselves. We put our hope in Jesus. Father, we thank you for that reminder today. We needed to hear that. People in here are facing battles, and you know them, and they're crying out to you, and we're praying, Father, that you're going to give them the courage and the strength that they need. Would you help them through a difficult time? Father, I'm praying that you're going to put armies together with people. I'm praying, Father, that people are going to rely upon one another. I'm praying that you're going to help us to focus upon you. I'm praying, Father, that we will hold the banner of Jesus high for others. Would you help us to do that? We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.